Chapter 6 of All the World by Charles Monroe Sheldon. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Recording by Adele de Pignerolles. Chapter 6 While Dick was having his experiences with Rufus Randall and Requa that Monday morning, Dr. Ward and Bert Chandler were holding a very interesting conference in the doctor's study, where Bert had gone after a reasonable visit with Esther, who had then retired to the kitchen to help her mother. Dr. Ward felt greatly interested in Bert, not only because he was to be his son-in-law, but because he had never understood how Esther, with her strong, intellectual, positive character, could give herself so unreservedly and even submissively to this comparatively uneducated, slow-moving young man, some 6 or 7 years her elder. He had met Esther from the very first as an equal at the very time in her life when she was sought by numbers of the most attractive young men in Bradford, and to the surprise of everyone she had accepted him. He had gone into Company 241 as a private, and ended in the same place. He had won no medals, and had not distinguished himself in any special manner, but he had been wounded in 6 different places, and had an indifference to danger so marked that even in a company that was distinguished for courage he was often quoted by his comrades. No one had ever heard him utter a word of complaint or of jealousy because some of the boys had received promotions and honourable mention over him. Bert always seemed to be somewhat surprised at himself that he was alive after all he had been through, and cheerfully grateful for that one fact. "There's a fellow in Battery B, down on the border, who got the War Medal engraved by Congress, and he used to wear it outdoors quite often," Bert said one day, when the boys were asking him where he kept his decorations. "And one day a Mexican sniper across the Rio Grande saw the glimmer of this medal on the soldier's proud chest. That soldier has a fine monument to his memory in the home cemetery, but I don't envy him the honour. I'd rather be here. I've always had a sort of hankering to be alive." Bert began his conference with Dr. Ward by asking sensible questions about the preparation necessary for his missionary service. "I'm too old, Dr. Ward, to go to college and medical school afterwards. What shall I have to do to fit myself for service as a worker in a hospital?" Dr. Ward leaned forward, and his face reflected his intense interest in the subject. "While you have been gone, Bert, some radical changes have occurred in the management of our missionary affairs. I needn't go into detail, but under the combination of all our foreign missionary societies, of all the denominations, we have schools of preparation for special fields in different parts of the world. Undoubtedly, with the practical experience you have had in the ambulance service, you could get ready to go to most any field for a hospital service within a year or year and a half at most. Have you thought of the place where you want to go?" "Yes, sir, I have, and so has Esther. We want to go to Mexico." "How? Mexico?" "Well, Dr. Ward, I was down on the border during the trouble with Villa, you remember." "I had forgotten it." "I was there a year and a half before the war broke out in Europe, and was transferred to Ambulance 241 at Captain Howard's recommendation. Things I saw down there on the border made me want to be appointed General Superintendent of Mexico's Education Bureau. We captured a bunch of raiding Mexicans one night, and among them were 2 Yaquis. One of them was sick, and when I got off duty I was allowed to nurse him. He got well and followed me all over camp like a dog. I believe he really thought a good deal of me. A month later he was shot and killed trying to escape across the line. He was brought back by the sentry who shot him, and before he died he spoke to me of his wife and children. Dr. Ward, that Yaqui, Alamero, seemed to me to be the cry of unregenerate, undeveloped, benighted Mexico. They can say what they like of Alamero and his tribe, but I know he was capable, mentally and morally, of development into a noble Christian specimen. And wouldn't it be an adventure of a lifetime, Dr. Ward, if Esther and I could go down there, and by some miracle actually find Alamero's wife and children, and help make real humans out of them?" It was the longest speech Dr. Ward had ever heard Bert make, and in a flash it opened up the young man's real inner life as he had never suspected it. "Of course it would. The greatest need of poor old Mexico is education and Christian development. And you are right about the Yaquis. They have every fundamental quality to build fine manhood on. All they lack is the opportunity. Now that Mexico has settled down to some form of stable government, and has won the confidence of the United States, and is welcoming our school teachers and missionaries, you couldn't go to a finer place to work. Tell me how far you went in your medical service in the ambulance." Bert modestly and briefly, as if ashamed of his long speech, mentioned 1 or 2 things that made Dr. Ward gasp in astonishment. "Do you mean to say you actually know how to perform amputations and even operate for abdominal troubles? You are not a certified M.D." "Well, you know there wasn't always time to work up to a degree over there. Once we brought in 14 fellows in one car, and when we got him up to the base there were only 4 surgeons there. The others were dead for sleep, and 9 had been bombed to death the night before in a Hun raid on the hospital. Sir Underwood and Nelson and I sawed off 5 legs and 3 arms and a few feet and fingers, and when we were in doubt Underwood read directions out of a medical book, telling us whether to use a hammer or a pair of scissors, and then Nelson and I went ahead as well as we could, asking Underwood to read slower when we weren't quite certain. And if I do say it, Dr. Ward, most of our operations turned out pretty well. It was either doing what we did, or letting the fellows die anyway. We hadn't any right to do what we did, but no one ever court-martialed us for it. And I don't dare tell how many abdominal operations I assisted in. I saw so many of these that I believe I could take out your appendix, Dr. Ward, without the help of a lantern at night. I don't believe you need a year and a half of preparation, Bert. Seems to me you had pretty good preparation over there. If I had appendicitis and were a Mexican or Yaqui in Mexico and I couldn't get a certified surgeon who had graduated with a sheepskin, I believe I would trust you to operate on me, but I should insist on a lantern, or at least a candle. Well, you see, sir, in case I should be unprepared at any point, Esther could go on with it. She tells me she has had 2 years already in the new hospital course here at Bradford, and has assisted in many major operations. I feel certain that in a tight place, Esther can work on the patient while I read the directions. Have you talked with Esther about Mexico? Yes, sir, and she is even more enthusiastic about it than I am. She is quite certain we shall find Alamero's family. Then you have really settled on your place of work? I feel quite sure of that, and we want to prepare accordingly. Dr. Ward was extremely interested in the whole thing. You don't know, Bert, but there is a splendid course of preparation in the American Missionary College for separate fields of the world. You can enter the Mexico section, and at once. It is well organized, and will be worth everything to you. Does this American college take in married couples? Why, yes, I think so, said Dr. Ward, falling back in his chair with a somewhat startled expression. I think Esther and I could do better works in our preparation if we were married. You don't object, do you? I understand that Mrs. Ward and yourself were willing we should be married as soon as feasible after the war was over. It's all right, Bert, for your mother and me. May I ask you a plain question? How about your finances? Yes, sir, I'm glad you asked. I believe Esther and I can live in Mexico on what I have been able to save up, and before that time I think I have enough to keep us both while we are preparing. But you will have a salary under the American Missionary Society, ample enough to support you both. Don't forget that. Of course, you do not know anything about the changes that have taken place in the religious life of the nation during the war. But all the missionary societies in the United States have combined and pooled their purses for one financial drive that has already begun, and promises to knit for missionary work of the world 10 or 20 times any amounts ever received or given. Well, I'm glad of that, of course, Dr. Ward, because Esther and I can do better work if we don't have to provide our own salaries. But as to my finances, I can take care of the 2 of us all right. I forgot my $10,000 insurance money, but hold on, I can't use that, can I? Because I'm not dead yet. That's quite a lot of money for a dead person to have to spend. I believe I'd rather be alive. They were interrupted by the appearance at the study door of Esther, who came to say that 3 of her Sunday school class wanted to see the doctor about their decisions, if he was not too busy. By all means, have them come right in. But first, Esther, here is a young man who wants to take you away from us down to Mexico. Before he goes, he wants to take you with him to the American College to prepare. And he says he has the means, without using his insurance money, to support you. What do you say? I say, replied Esther, going up to Bert, who had risen the moment she appeared, that I am ready to go with him anywhere, and that I would rather go to Mexico than anywhere else in all the world. You have my blessing and your mother's. Go out and fix the date, and send in those pupils of yours. Esther was not ordinarily an impulsive girl in her affections, but she ran over to her father, kissed him heartily, and came back to where Bert stood. My heart trouble is getting worse all the time, Bert was saying, as the 2 went out of the study. I not only have heart trouble when you eye me, but I feel palpitations when you do a thing like that to your father. What do you suppose is the reason? Dr. Ward did not hear what Esther said, but a happy laugh came rippling back into the study from 2 of the happiest young people in the world, and he said to himself, Thank God for happiness. The awful war has not killed it. That young man will make Esther not only happy, but contented in a real home. I feel certain of it. The doctor rubbed his glasses, put them back, and rose to welcome Esther's girls, who came in to give their experiences and ask for counsel. This group was followed within an hour by another, and in the evening some of the young men came in. History was being made fast, and great matters were discussed in the days before another Sunday came around. Dick came in before the luncheon hour that day, and went right up to his room. When his mother called him, he called down the stairs that he was not hungry, and asked the others not to wait for him. "I'm afraid Reck disappointed him," Esther said anxiously. "I saw him as he went up to his room, just after the girls went away, and he looked pretty downhearted. Poor Dick, I wonder if Reck did refuse." "He will tell us," Dr. Ward said, but his face was grave and his manner troubled. Late that night, Dick stole down from his room to his father's study. As a little boy, Dick had gone to his father with every trouble, large and small. During the war, his father's letters had revealed to the son a wealth of affection and understanding which he had never known his dad possessed. Instead of growing apart during that awful separation, the two had struck up a rare friendship and understanding. Dr. Ward found out that during that correspondence, desultory and discontented as it was, that the boy who had gone away somewhat reckless and thoughtless had qualities of the rare sort: courage, patience, endurance, a fine sense of loyalty, devotion to duty, joy in suffering, and a remarkable understanding of what America was in the war to do. On his side, the lad had learned for the first time what a rare character his father was, how far-sighted and unselfish and devoted he was to his life work, what great ideals he had, and how steadily and quietly he tried to live up to them. All this the son found out after months of separation. And the confidence Dick reposed in his father that night was the supreme proof of the eternal friendship the Great War had established between them. At the end of half an hour Dick was sobbing like a child, his head on his father's desk, his empty coat sleeve pathetically dangling over the arm of his father's chair, as the doctor laid his hand on the lad's head and tried to say a word of comfort. "Surely Reckle will decide at last to go with you, no matter what her father says." "I don't know, Dad. She seemed to me absolutely set against it, and I've been imagining a horrible thing. Suppose the government should make out a case against Mr. Randall, could they send him to state prison? And if so, I could not ask Reckwood to go with me then." "The cases so far proved by the government have resulted only in heavy fines. But popular feeling is growing that imprisonment is the only real punishment. It is within the possibilities that Randall may suffer as an example. Here is an item that shows how people over the country feel." Dr. Ward picked up a newspaper and read from a column of New York news: "New York drive brings million from tax dodgers. New York, August 11th. Special. As the result of a drive inaugurated by the Collector of Internal Revenue for the 2nd New York District, more than $1,000,000 have been realized from persons who sought to evade income, excess profits, and commodity taxes. A single delinquent tax payment Saturday was for $100,000. Note: this is one of scores of similar items sent out by the Associated Press. The people are beginning to demand imprisonment for men who cheat the government in this manner," Dr. Ward went on. "It is one of the most disheartening things in our whole history that during the war, and now when it is over, there are thousands of men in America who have no standards of morals and no definitions of patriotism. While you boys were fighting over there for the freedom of the world, these men over here like Randall have been fighting for profits. Next to the Germans, they are the most hated of any class in America. Some of them have only just begun to find it out. Randall, unless I am mistaken, is one, and he would be glad to make restitution now, if there is any way out. Did he seem at all disturbed when you called him a profiteer?" "Dad, he started to say something like a defence. Then he looked at me as if he was afraid of something, broke off his sentence in the middle, and got up and went out, storming along the hall and banging the door like one beside himself. Innocent men do not act as he acted." "I'm afraid he is guilty, Dick, because in every case so far brought by the government indictments have been brought, without an exception." "Dad, what shall I do? What will Reckwa do, if her father has to pay the penalty of imprisonment? It seems too horrible to imagine." "I can't answer your question, Dick. You have come home to real trouble, lad. Stand up like a soldier and trust your Heavenly Father for strength, for vain is the arm of man in cases like these." They talked late into the night, and before Dick went upstairs to his room his father prayed, kneeling by the side of the boy, an arm over his shoulder, commending him to the good God for comfort and strength in this time of unusual trial. And when Dick went out of the study, he carried with him some gleam of hope for the future. But in what way it would be realized he could not possibly determine. But as the week passed, it smote Dick with a fresh blow that Reckwa sent no word, and he did not attempt to call. Esther, in a burst of feeling, late in the week offered to go and see Reckwa and have a talk with her, but Dick, whose heart was sore and whose mind was in a turmoil, declined her offer, and almost frightened her by the stern attitude he assumed, when he declared that the affair lay entirely between Reckwa and himself. It was for her or her father to speak the next word. CHAPTER 7